All
Yes, we've
right.
just been informed.
Recording has begun. Here we go. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity today and the brain's ability to change, but why do we care about that? Why is that idea important? And so when people first start microdosing, most people who come to our practice and are interested in it want to change something about their lives. And in order to change the way we're showing up and change something in our behavior, we have to first change the way that we think. Everything comes from thought, and that's the initial place. Now, preceding thought sometimes can be an emotional response, and those are influenced by belief systems, experiences, things that we've been through in our life. But at some point in time, those emotions we have given a definition to and that they mean something to us. So we have an emotion that arises at some point in time, and that moves through our thought process and then becomes a behavior. The behavior is anything from verbal to an action to another thought or another belief system that gets connected to that. A lot of those behaviors become, or behavioral outcomes become ideas about ourselves and what others are thinking about us and how we relate to the world around us. So, if we need to change thought in that center point for an outcome in our life to change, how do we do that? Well, if we talk about what thought actually is, thought is just information. Like we just discussed, things happen in life, and that's what gives us definition and meaning to any idea or belief system that we have. When a baby is born, it has no definitions, has no even really recognition of the self. There's no belief systems that are in that little tiny human at the time that it shows up on the planet. All of those things come over time, come from environment, then personal experiences, and then that idea of the self, or what we often refer to as ego, is developed over time and becomes strengthened in multifaceted ways throughout the lifespan. So we end up as these adults who one day sit and hear a group or an idea or reflect on the self or look at our life and say, hey, something's not working here for me to have the life that I want. There's something happening in my life that I want to shift. And so, how do I do that? So then we dive down into, well, how do I get here? Well, where are these beliefs coming from? So, thought is just information and definitions. Every single thing that we think about has a definition attached to it, and it's very mechanical in many ways. We've discussed previously kind of about that idea of thought being mechanical and where it actually comes from, but the brain and how efficient it processes does not really provide space when we're in the middle of something to think about, hmm, where did I get this concept? How did I get to this point? The brain is very autonomic. It's very quick to process, again, for that efficiency purpose. So when we're in the middle of something challenging, we often look outside of ourselves first. Well, I got here because this happened, or because this other person did this thing, or because the culture looks like this, or the political system is doing this, or my religious belief affiliation has taught me this. And when we look at all those things, we have to bring that back to how have we decided that each of those things has a role in our life and how we define ourselves, how we define others, and how we define the situations around us, and even how we define what we want for our lives. For those of us sitting on group today, we all would likely have a similar definition to the word success because we're in a similar culture. Probably have some different nuances attached to that based off of the home that we were raised in, potentially, where success looked a certain way, or we were told that it looked a certain way. We were taught we were supposed to want or achieve certain things, whether it's financial or status or a title or a role. But those are things that were given to us. We weren't born with that definition of success. We weren't even born with the idea of what success is. So now not only are you supposed to stay alive, but that living or that idea of being alive has a definition attached to it. But great, be alive, but also be successful. And here's your definition of success and what that should look like. And so then we go through our life trying to achieve this definition someone else has given us. So recognizing that that's where a lot of these thoughts and ideas come from, then again, is another piece to actually being able to change that. So, in order to change those definitions or information, though, there has to be a rewiring. Because if we again go back to that idea of the efficiency of the brain, it is wired to process information very quickly. So, kind of like Scott talking about skiing. When you go skiing, if you end up, you're the first one on the mountain, you've got the fresh powder, you can go wherever you want. That's the baby being born with all this neuroplasticity. They can think and learn whatever they want. But as time goes on, the more people that go down that mountain, the more experiences that we have in life, the more definitions that we're given, there's a lot of tracks that become very fixed and rigid. And once your skis get in those tracks that have been put there before you, it is very challenging to get out of them. You end up kind of tripping and falling out of them, right? So that's how you end up in a knee brace, like we talked about. But that thought is very much the same way. It is easier to stay in the tracks that are already there and that have been established than to create new ones. So the first thing that comes to mind in our culture here in the United States is, well, I should probably go to therapy. And I see there's another therapist on the screen today, which is awesome. Welcome. Glad you're here. But, as clinicians, we recognize that therapy is, for the most part, sitting and talking about it. And if you come and you sit and you talk about something, you are, in essence, creating an opportunity for there to be some new perspective, but the brain still has those fixed and rigid ski uh, um, lines to go in. It's still wanting to go down those same paths. That is easier. So you leave therapy and you're like, oh man, great ideas. My therapist is so smart, obviously. Totally joking for the rest of you, but my therapist had some great insight. They offered me some new perspective. Now I'm going to go, and this week's going to be awesome. It's going to be totally different. And then what happens? You go forward in that week, things happen, and you think, okay, the therapist said this, I want to do that, but oh man, that's so hard. What if he or she isn't right? What if what they actually meant was something else? What if I'm not capable of doing that? What if, you know, I'm too broken or I'm too far gone? And we start questioning these things. Why? Not because we're broken, not because we're so far gone, but because it's easier to stay in that fixed and rigid way of thinking. So then you come back to therapy the next week, and the therapist says, oh, great to see you again. How was your week? Like, it was great. I thought about some of the things that you said, but I didn't do that. Oh, well, you thought about it. Okay, that's great. That's a first step. Why didn't you do it? Man, it just didn't make sense. It's just hard. That's the reality. So you can spend lots and lots of time, whether it's going to therapy or reading self-help books or going to a religious facility and getting all of this information, but the brain is fixed in how it wants to process that information and what the reference points are going to be for it. But another thing that's super cool about the brain is it has neuroplasticity. It has the ability to have new ways of thinking, to create new neural connections, to strengthen the connections that are there, and that's what psilocybin does. So microdosing is what allows for the rewiring of the brain, quiets down that rigid thought system, which is called our default mode network, and allows for new neural connections to be made so that over time, with those new neural connections, you can legitimately reset the way that you think. I think that's the magical part of what has been often called magic mushrooms. What is that magic? The magic is that you can show up in a different way. You can experience something new. So that's where psilocybin comes in, is it allows for that rewiring to happen. So the rewiring now is happening. Now where are you getting that new perspective? Where are you getting that new way of thinking? Well, if you're microdosing and you're going back to your therapist, then you have the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I had a great week. I took into account the things that you said. It was hard to implement some new things. It was challenging. Everything within me wanted to go down that default way of experiencing and thinking like I've always been doing, but I was able to choose something different. And that was cool. And then next week I can go forward and choose something different again. And these things that were irritating me, now I can kind of brush them off a little bit. They don't emotionally impact me the way that they were. And that comes from the rewiring. So in order to change the outcome of our lives, of our daily experiences, we have to change the way that we think. To change the way that we think, we have to chemically rewire how the brain is processing that information so that it's open to new perspectives and new ways of thinking. So I'm going to pause there and give you guys a chance to reflect on that. And I'd love to have some conversation around your ideas on those things.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I I guess let me articulate this properly. So the default mode network has also the capacity, I think, to protect you in some situations. And so I really wanted to attend this meeting today because I started microdosing. And when I did, I had an old injury. I broke the L3 and my L4 vertebrae in my spine about 10 years ago. And it does not bother me at all unless I am microdosing. And so it's brought up this question for me related to the default mode network, which is my default mode to protect my brain from thinking like, that this injury is still online or that this injury is bothering me. And it's really bothering me like kind of in the background every day. But that when I'm taking the mushrooms, it's like, hey, no, like pay attention to this like back injury because there's something going on here. And I guess I was just curious as it related to the default mode network, if the default mode network had the capacity to protect you or like how that integrated with the mushrooms capacity.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate you bringing that up because that is a huge part of what the intelligence and efficiency of the brain does is protect us. When we come in with no information as a little tiny human, then we also don't know what is a threat to us. So at that most basic fundamental place, we are wired for survival. So the first things that we learn are always, what is a threat to my survival? What is safe? One of the body's way of letting us know that something is harmful to us is through those pain receptors. Hey, don't touch this, it's hot. It will burn you. Ultimately, whether or not you feel pain, burning will cause the body to break down and brings harm to the body and could lead to destruction of the self. So instead, we have those senses that say, ooh, this is hot, and I learn that that's a threat. So we go through it and certainly have, but it does the same thing emotionally. I've experienced this relationship, this thing happened in this relationship, that felt like a threat to me. So now I'm going to make sure whenever I see these things that feel similar to that relationship, that's now what I'm going to define as a threat. That's not always helpful, but it is the brain's way of protecting us. All that information absolutely becomes part of our default mode network because it is that efficiency of processing based off of experiences. So it has those reference points. When we start microdosing, often what will happen is the brain will start to quiet down on some of the things that have been very self-protective or that we have used as coping mechanisms. So, to your point about a physical injury, my theory on that would be that the brain has allowed you to continue moving forward and not focus on the pain, particularly that's there from that physical injury because you needed to continue going forward. That's the, I don't have time for this, I'm going to set this aside. And when we quiet and be distracted or be busy over here, when we quiet that down, we become much more aware of the body itself as a physical being and how we are responding to the things around us. So it's very common for individuals who start microdosing to have less physical pain. Oh, there's a relaxation of those somatic responses to physical stress and trauma and things that have been there. But it is also not uncommon for there to be an awareness of things that were there previously that we've decided not to pay attention to. The only way that the body can communicate with us in that physiological way is through a lot of those emotions or pain receptor types of responses. So the reminder that, hey, this injury is here allows you to protect yourself and not re-injure that same area. Maybe there's adjustments that need to be made in the way that you're carrying yourself on a daily basis or whatever that might look like. And I don't want to go too far down that path for specifics for you, but it is not uncommon for there to be definite physiological and somatic things that we become more aware of with microdosing. Because our brain, in being very busy and distracted, is what covers up a lot of those things that we don't want to pay attention to. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of like touch base on that. And it makes more sense what you said about how the way it's working is that it's allowing for like awareness to have happen versus any other thought that I was possibly thinking.
Yeah, it's not punishing you for microdosing, we'll put it that way. It's not like, oh, you want to have awareness? Okay, great. Here's your first one. But, as we make accommodations for injuries that happen along the way, the only way for the body to tell us that there's still something we need to pay attention to is through pain receptors or swelling or shortness of breath or, different things that happen based off of the physiological thing that might be going on with the body. And so often we're like, yeah, 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 we're all infallible. That'll never happen to me. I'll just keep going. I'm obviously going to live to infinity because I'm me. And that's not the reality. And when we stop and we really listen to the body, not in a sensual, emotional way predominantly, but in a sensory way. What am I noticing about what I smell, what I taste, what I touch, what I hear, what my body is telling me from those sensory responses, which pain receptors would certainly be a part of that. Then we are much more connected to the reality of our experience and what we have that we're working with on a daily basis. Otherwise, we just run around and cover it all up. What other thoughts or reflections have come up in kind of that discussion about changing information and neuroplasticity and rewiring and allowing for new ideas, new belief systems, new definitions? Or even just things that you've noticed since starting to microdose. Maybe
Yeah,
there's
I can speak to some things. So, good morning. How are you?
good morning, good to see you, Kyle.
Good, good. So, I guess one thing I've been able to kind of understand is have like a more 3D or like not 3D, but like outside looking in, like if something would would usually anger me or something, right? Like or whatever. I'm able to like kind of focus on it from an outsider's perspective for a second. Like it's not like I'm like dissociating myself from myself or whatever, but it's like I'm able to have a little bit more empathy or pause and kind of something that would trigger me or cause anxiety, right? Or because anger is a secondary emotion, right? So like for example, talking through personally maybe something that would make me uneasy in the past where I would get angry, right? Because I didn't want to talk about it. Now I'm able to like be a bit more open and just like express my feelings like, hey, this makes me uncomfortable. That's why I'd rather not talk about it rather than just be angry. So it's allowed me to, you know, restructure that network a little bit to where anger or frustration was the first emotion to be, I still get frustrated, right? But at the same time, there's an intermediate step in there. Um, and that's cool. And I did notice when I stopped microdosing for a couple days that I used to like drinking quite a bit. And ever since starting microdosing, that has kind of dropped off. It's been like 5 weeks and the craving is gone. Not gone, but it's much, much less. And I noticed when I stopped for like 3 or 4 days that craving kind of came back. And that was really interesting to me. Maybe it was like the anxiety, the stress, or whatever, but it's almost like it kind of curbed uh, that not it's not. I mean, it was an addiction, but that desire, I guess. Um, those are two things that I've kind of noticed. I've only been doing it for maybe 5 weeks, but today I tried to like half my dose, so we're gonna try to do like half, half a 0.05 moving forward and see how that works. I'm still kind of adjusting to it. So those are two things that I've kind of noticed.
No, I appreciate that, Kyle. Thanks for being willing to share that, a piece of that just in your conversation, that empathy and that awareness is being willing to even share that within a group discussion. So thank you for sharing that with us. And, those reduced alcohol cravings are key to note because alcohol, it's used typically in a situation that you use the word addiction, but really it was a coping mechanism. It was, I want to cover what's going on. So when we talk about an emotion like anger, and to your point, there's something else that's underneath that emotions, that the way that it shows up, it's really that behavioral outcome of the thought itself that's preceding that. So rather than actually giving consideration to what the thoughts were and what the definitions were that were bothering you or causing that anxiety and leading to those feelings of discomfort, alcohol was something that was easy to turn to. So it makes sense that as you're quieting down that default mode network and all those beliefs and ideas and being more aware of what is here, what do I want to do with it, why is it here, the need to use alcohol as a coping mechanism isn't there. You don't need to use it because the pain point isn't there anymore. You're actually going through it instead of trying to just cover it up.
It's there, but it's more manageable.
Yes, exactly. And that's what will continue to shift over time. So that's your recognition and being, relatively early on in your microdosing. You take a few days off, and that recognition is, okay, I don't have that full rewiring yet. This default mode network hasn't reset. This neuroplasticity is not complete. You're in the stages of that happening. So you're noticing those benefits. But when you remove the supplement, the mushroom that is helping with those changes, because you're so early on, the brain's like, yo, we're not quite there yet. Keep going forward, keep working through this, keep processing those belief systems, those definitions, those ideas that are underneath these things. And then you will get to that place of you skip a few days and you're not going to notice, or it'll be less impactful. Or even, kind of to your comment about reducing the dose, don't rush to reduce the dose. Using a certain amount of mushroom is not better or worse. There's no like, okay, if I have to use a whole gram of mushroom for my microdose, I must be really messed up. No, it probably means you've had a lot of trauma happen in your life, or you're on a lot of different medications, and the mushroom has to kind of offset a lot of those things. And this is not specific to you, Kyle, because I know that's not your dose, but for individuals that do get to that place that have that higher dose, so I'm using 10 little scoops every day of the ground powder, man, I can't, that feels like so much. Don't get caught up on the dose itself. Use the dose that is helpful to you. The time will come that your brain will tell you, that's a little much. I don't need that. Or we can skip a day and it doesn't have that noticeable difference of still having some of that underlying belief and thought and definition that's there that you're trying to process and work through. So let the process be the process for you. Saying I only needed to microdose for 2 months, and then I went off of it and I'm better than I was, or however you define better, I'm not drinking as much, or I'm managing my anger a little bit differently now. But if you're not really at that final outcome of where you want to be, then that was a premature discontinuation of something that was helpful to you. Your body is not developing a tolerance to it when you're microdosing. Use a dose that's helpful to you. Your brain will let you know when you want to reduce that dose. And it's kind of hard to quantify that on the front end because that's not what we're used to doing. We're used to being told you can use it like this, and then you need to reduce it like this, and don't skip a day because this terrible thing will happen. Or, white lab coat person will tell you when it's okay for you to come off or to stop or to discontinue. And that's not what this process is. Microdosing is really learning to trust yourself. Listen to your body, listen to your brain, pay attention to what you're noticing. Just like you talked about now, being able to have some space before a response. So, and this is to all of us that are on group today. That's why chapter 1 in the book is learn to trust your natural self. We spend a lot of time looking outside of ourselves. You white lab coat over here, you PhD over there, you with whatever alphabet soup after your name over here, you parent or boss or mentor or whoever. None of those roles are negative or bad in and of themselves, but we have begun to be trained to look outside of us and to go to other people to tell us what we should or shouldn't be thinking or doing, or how, or why. And that's exactly why we end up in the situation that we're in right now. Just to go back to that basic idea of success. Who told you what success is? And that's what you are then supposed to go and achieve. Listen to yourself. What do you want? What makes sense for you? And give yourself permission to take whatever time you need. It's your life. It's your time on this planet. So allow for that to be there and for those small changes to happen that lead to those bigger changes that really lead to that outcome that you want, which is ultimately the life that you want. There's not one specific designated outcome that's being achieved. It's how do you want to experience your life on a daily basis? So, Kyle, back to you. Thank you so much for sharing what you're noticing in such a short time period with the microdosing for your journey, and continue to give yourself permission to sit in that and enjoy that and appreciate it and notice the things that continue to shift for you because it's a scratch on the surface.
Yeah, I guess I have one more question, like in regards to I talked to some other or like some other individuals that maybe didn't have such a high stress life. For me, my life is very high stress. I have a lot of, my job dictates a lot of stress.
Mhm.
And this other individual was in a much more like lower stress, and they were able to like I'm wondering like microdosing in a high stress environment versus like a low stress environment. I feel like in a low stress I'd get to enjoy it a lot more because you're actually like restructuring it in like a peaceful way rather than restructuring it in a high stress environment. Like because we're talking about rewiring the DMN, right? Or
Mhm.
but like I'm rewiring it in a very high stress, high paced, like environment. Whereas like they're restructuring it in a less stressed, like more chill environment. So I'm interested in the difference between the two, right? Like they're probably getting a much more beneficial outcome because they're restructuring it in a low stress, positive way. Where me, like I'm just still, running a million miles a minute. So I'm just interested in that portion of it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question for discussion. When we look at stress, stress is our stress hormone, cortisol levels, are a response to the idea that we have defined of what should or should not be happening. And a lot of that, so if we equate that then to a work environment, the job that you have specific to your question, it has been given to you the definition, the idea that in this role, these are the expectations of you, and this is how we expect it to be accomplished or completed in some way. So that's what's been handed to you. Your choices within that are what you choose to take on from what has been given to you. So you can choose to take on that if this job looks the way that they want it to look, then therefore you are successful. You can choose to take on the idea that this job is all there is, and therefore you have to make it work, and this is what it needs to look like. You can choose to take on this is what has been handed to you, and here is how I am going to define that and how I'm going to show up in this role. So I mean, and there's other ways that you can kind of have, intermediate options within those things. But it really comes down to how do you define yourself within the role? That's where the stress is. We only take on the stress that we allow or the ideas that we allow ourselves to take on. So
Yeah, I guess like I get what you're saying. I completely understand that. But like say for example, that person, woke up, did meditation, had breakfast, went for a walk, chilled out, enjoyed the day, had a nature, like and was able to consistently do that day after day after day after day versus like, I call real life, but versus my scenario, right? Because both of them are real life.
Yeah.
Um, it's just like I feel like if I was able to take 2 weeks off and microdose and do those things and have more self-care and, do that, I would probably experience a lot better benefit. I was just interested in, rewiring the DMN in potentially a negative way to be more accustomed to, to that high stress, environment. But
Yeah, your default. So let's separate a little bit experience versus that default mode network. So when you are in the place of microdosing and that default mode network is quieted down and you have this neuroplasticity happening and it's learning new things and being open to new ideas, even within what we'll call a fast-paced daily life, you still get to choose what you're going to allow in there. You still get to decide how am I going to have my life look for me? Having more meditation time or less meditation time is not good or bad. It's just two different experiences. So whether or not you create space for meditation for you is completely dependent on the type of life that you want. And also the type of life that other person wants. If the other person, if their goal is to just have time to walk out in nature and meditate and sit quietly and do those sorts of things, then they have what we'll call achieved the life that they want. But what if they're able to do all those things because they don't have a job? Unemployment allows for a lot of time to meditate and to be in nature. I had a time period that I was in between jobs, and it was during the summer, and I spent a lot of time at the pool with my kids. And I called my tan, I said, "This is the glow of unemployment." Because I was able to go be in the sun and just hang out and it looked so relaxing, but it wasn't really what I wanted per se. What I wanted was to be able to have income for the family, but I was also experiencing the time that was there in that moment to be out in nature, to go to the pool, to spend time with the kids. So if you are in the life that you are living right now and moving towards the goals that you want, your default mode network is being filled with the definitions of the things that you want. And that can look a lot different than someone else's life that they want. Elon Musk did not achieve what he has now because he spent a lot of time in meditation and being out in nature. He might do that a lot more now, probably has some nice yachts to spend, time tanning and all of those things. But he chose, there are things that I want, and this is the life that I'm going to go for. And I know I bring him up in a number of different instances because it's just an excellent reference point that everyone is familiar with of a certain level of financial status. But if, Kyle, the life that you want has a faster pace to it because it's a certain maybe financial thing or definition of success thing that you are moving towards, that's where the quieting of the default mode network gives you a chance to decide, is this how I'm going to define success? Is this really going to be how I define what I want for my life? And if it is, then that's completely healthy for you. We can't tell our military and our soldiers, hey, you shouldn't want to be in battle when that has been the goal of all the training. So you defining what you want for your life, it can look very different from someone else, and that default mode network rewiring is not going to be any different than the person that spends, 6 hours a day meditating in nature. It's just going to be a different outcome.
yeah. And then one last question, and I'll shut up. But since you mentioned Elon Musk, what have you ever talked or heard about the benefits of ketamine? And what's
Um,
your thoughts on that? I know
they
this is a completely different meeting. It
yeah.
has nothing to do with this, but
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I'll touch on that quickly. So ketamine is works in a completely different way than psilocybin does. Psilocybin works more specifically focused on the serotonin system if we're talking large doses. With the microdosing, there's a lot of other benefits within the brain, But ketamine specifically, if we look at large doses of ketamine, that works on the glutamate system. So ketamine blocks the NMDA receptor, allows for a huge glutamate release. It's very fast acting, short lasting, and in the way that it impacts. Typically, from a clinical perspective, my recommendation of someone looking into a ketamine experience would be for someone that's in a suicidal ideation state. They need a reset. They need something to dissociate from the way that they are thinking and to really draw them out of that thought process. Psilocybin is very intuitive, turns you more towards yourself. Ketamine is dissociative and separates you from yourself. So both can have their place. Had a client recently who was in a very intense suicidal ideation place. I mean, and when I say suicidal ideation, I don't just mean, well, maybe it would be easier if I wasn't here. I mean, actively in that depressive state, moving towards finding things that give reason to not be here, making a plan, making sure your will is in place, those sorts of things, and moving towards action. That's that serious suicidal ideation place. Ketamine experience, highly recommended in that type of instance. A large mushroom experience, not going to have the same outcome when we're in that specific type of thinking. When someone is in a depressive state, then mushrooms can have a completely different optimal outcome. And certainly microdosing can have a huge contribution to moving out of a depressive state. But with somebody that's in that more active suicidal ideation way of thinking, that's where ketamine is especially helpful. For a longer term or for microdosing, I do not recommend ketamine. Again, this is my personal clinical perspective. Ketamine is addictive. And so using something that's addictive to either treat addiction or try and shift the way that we think, it's a lot of another coping mechanism. So I'm not in agreement with that theory or route of helpful technique, so to speak. And it's limited. You can only use ketamine for so long. The body develops a tolerance to it. Again, it is addictive. A physician or clinician is only going to prescribe it for a certain amount of time because you cannot continue to use ketamine for an extended period of time. It has to have an endpoint. Totally different than using psilocybin for microdosing. You can use that across the lifespan as long as you want to. The body does not develop a tolerance, and it really changes the way that we think because it is intuitive. It is turning you towards yourself. Why am I thinking this way? What's underneath these things? So that's my quick synopsis of differentiation between psilocybin and ketamine.
Thanks.
So I have a question.
Yeah, Anton.
Um, I was given a message from during a meditation with some of the Ram Dass people that my goal is to see the world as it is, not as I am. And so I've been cycling back and forth between seeing the world as I am, the ego projection, and seeing the world as it is. And I'm wondering, in terms of microdosing, in terms of the psilocybin, um, the cycling seems like an endless loop. Like I go back, I see the world as it is, I appreciate it, I find both horror and beauty, and then I kind of go back into seeing the world as I am. So, what kind of contribution can microdosing of the psilocybin make to that process?
So I certainly have thoughts I want to talk to specific to the ego, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more, Anton. So can you provide for group benefit an example of seeing the world as it is, and an example that what you feel like would be an alter state of that of seeing the world as you are?
Seeing the world as I am, I tend to be very judgmental. I tend to not accept things the way they are.
Hmm.
Like for example, I'll give you an example in my teaching. The students are now using AI to cheat, and they're not learning. They generate tremendous information, really good writing, but it's not theirs. Okay, so they're cheating themselves, and I tell them that, and that's me seeing the world the way that I think it should be, which is that they're learning and doing their own work. And then I step back and I look at the system that I'm functioning in, which is dedicated to extraction of money from people rather than um, uh, fostering a really in-depth educational experience based on integrity. And so I am kind of looking at those two situations where yes, this is the way it is, and yes, this is the way I want it to be. So back and forth between those two, kind of reconciling the world as it is with the world that the way I want it to be or the way I think it should be. That's kind of where I'm cycling. It seems like the microdosing has helped open that a little bit, but I'm not quite sure if it's going to help or what, or maybe some guidance on how to move forward in that loop.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I think to some degree it what we call helps in that acceptance aspect, and then and to another degree it can exaggerate what we'll call frustration with it because we are seeing things differently, and I'll use the phrase more clearly, more naturally. So thank you for giving a little bit more of that because some of the words that you used really stood out as far as being judgmental and choosing, do we accept things as they are or do we look at them more as we want them to be? And that's that honesty of the self. Am I irritated about this? I'll use the example that you used with AI. What is it about AI? I see them as cheating themselves because I being you, define education as an experience where you take away certain things and you bring back to the class information or to your paper or to your assignment, information that you in your brain tossed around, reflected against what was provided, and brought back a thought that came from you, not from a computer system. And that's what the self is defining as education, and you're working in an educational system. And that is the system that was given to you during the time that you participated within the educational learning aspect of the system. So that is what seems what we'll use as the word right. That seems right to you. That seems legitimate. It seems honest. It seems um, uh, ethical within the educational system. But the flip side of it is now that AI is something that is a tool. And if it is being presented as a tool, then maybe the alter perspective on it would be that the tool is being utilized by the students you currently have in a way to find things for themselves in a way that doesn't reflect back to the way you did, but it is what we're going to call right for them because it is a tool that society now has access to. So when we look at what is right, we have to look at where does the definition of right come from? That definition only comes from inside of us. So then the shift in the perspective could be I can exist in this system because I see what the system is, but it's right for me to be in the system because of whatever I choose to take away from it. That there's still a contribution that you share in the educational journey for each of your students. There's still a paycheck that is affiliated with that, that provides for you and for your family and the things that you want to do. And there still are going to be students within that system that appreciate the way that you see it and appreciate the perspective that you bring. And if there's a fulfillment in it for you, then great. If it's just a paycheck, then that's also what a job is. And so it's not, that statement is not to diminish the value of professors that really bring education and understanding and awareness and perspective and information to a student body. But there is a recognition that every single job is done because there is some sort of financial aspect connected to it because that is how we survive now. So to kind of to Kyle's, example of somebody that has a lot of time to just meditate and be in nature, either they have all the financial resources that they need, or whatever other Maslow's lower hierarchy of needs are met, shelter, food, those sorts of things, or they decided that they don't have that, but they have this other thing. So to be able to say that finances are not a part of what we do now and that we shouldn't do something, quote unquote, just for the money, well, that's exactly why we do certain things because money is the tool that allows us to have the things that we need for survival, for shelter, for food, for transportation, for safety, security, all of those things. So I stray a little bit from that question, Anton, but I think that bigger idea of a job can be that I am doing this for a paycheck, for financial resources. In addition, if the job brings some personal fulfillment as well, whether it's personal fulfillment in information that Anton brings to his students or personal fulfillment that Kyle gets from meeting the requests and the demands of the fast-paced work environment that he's in, or the personal fulfillment that a therapist gets from sitting with clients and helping them see a new perspective, or all the other hundreds of thousands of jobs out there, then I call that kind of a bonus. But we need to be honest in why are we doing the things that we're doing. And if we think we're going to do it to go buck the system and create something different, then we are creating a lot of conflict for ourselves. And there has to be something deeper and stronger behind that that's going to continue driving it forward. But that recognition that it's okay when other people don't agree with us and they don't think that's right for them, that's really that place of peace and contentment that separates us from is it about me or can I just be in the world that I'm existing in?
But let me give you another example here. I had a student who was really struggling. She was not doing well at all, and I really terrible performance, bad papers, and I kept marking her down, saying, you've got to work harder, you got to work harder. And so she contacted me and told me that she's a single mother of two, and her own mother had just moved in with her, and she was very sick and she was really struggling with her life, finding time for her studies in terms of working full time, taking care of two kids, and now she has a sick mother. And so I saw that I'm kind of projecting out what I thought she should be versus what is really going on for her. And so kind of the lesson was for me, I never really know what's going on with other people. They're living in their own worlds and they have their own issues and they have their own problems. And I don't really know that. And so the struggle that I'm getting between seeing the world as it is and the world as I am is I project myself out as to what I think that person should be or should be doing versus allowing them to be as they are. And
Yes.
that I cycle back and forth with that. And I'm not sure how to be in that place of allowing the world to be as it is, and yet keeping a strong image of what I think the world should be. So that's the endless loop.
And that is exactly where, to your kind of original question, microdosing is helpful because that rigid thinking that we have is rooted in the idea of ourself. If we're wired for self-survival, then literally everything that happens in our life is a threat to us that needs to be mitigated in some sort. We enter relationships so that we have companionships and so that we can procreate. We live in communities so that we have larger groups of numbers and we can have more safety in numbers and have shared resources. But all of it comes back to that idea of the self. And with microdosing, when we quiet down the default mode network, we have a chance to realize how many self-protective layers we have installed around us from the time we've been born to the age that we are now. And that is exactly where all those concepts come from of what is right, what is wrong, what should happen, what should not happen, us against them. All of this division and divisiveness comes from that idea of if you don't agree with me, then you're against me. And if you don't see the world the way that I see it, then you're wrong. And that is not the case. That is not what allows us to actually live in a community of the world as it is, to use your definition there. So when we use psilocybin and we're quieting down the default mode network, it's also reducing blood flow to the amygdala. So we're not in that hypervigilant fight or flight emotional standpoint. It is enhancing that neuroplasticity, so we do have an opportunity to have less resistance in seeing the world in a new way, and in reducing that idea of the self-importance. That's what's held in that default mode network as well. When that self-protective piece goes away, we reduce that idea of the significance or importance of the self. Not in that we don't need to survive, but it's not so much about us. And so the fact that you're even seeing that dichotomy exist there and a little bit of that struggle between the two ideas Anton shows that some of that is already happening for you because you have more awareness of it. We go through life with no awareness of it, just being very self-protective by in our modified state until we have a chance to have that quieted down. And that's what microdosing does, is it allows that to quiet down so we can show up differently, so we can respond differently. Kyle mentioned empathy. You've mentioned responding to other people, not knowing what's going on in their life and having more empathy around that. Because you're right, we're in a world of literally billions of people, and we all have a really high idea of our own self-importance. And that when that is portrayed out to the rest of the world, it shuts us off from really experiencing natural, legitimate life with the people around us, and it keeps us in constant conflict with them. The same thing happens in our intimate relationships, whether it's someone on the street or someone in a class or someone in a different political party or a different religious belief system, or right inside our home with somebody that sleeps in the bed next to us or shares a space in our same dwelling space. It is, I'm right, you're wrong. Or if you're right, I must be wrong. And those two things do not have to coexist. You can both be right. What do you want for your life? That's where the shift really happens.
Hmm. I'm just reminded of that line from the movie Beaches where Bette Midler says, "Well, enough about me. What do you think about me?"
Yeah, exactly.
She's, she's so centered on herself that
Yep.
she just can't exist for someone else in the way
Yeah.
that they need.
And to even take that a little bit further, we're constantly thinking that anyway. When we are in that modified way of living, we're assessing what we think everybody else thinks about us in every single minute that we're out in society. That's exactly what causes things like social anxiety. I cannot go and be in a group of people without thinking about what all of them are thinking about me, and that just increases my anxiety, so I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to isolate. It's easier. Instead of recognizing that and recognizing we have the opportunity to say, it doesn't matter what they're thinking about me. I'm going to show up and just be me, because what they're thinking is, well, what is Charity thinking about me?
Mm.
It's just going the other direction. So we sit in that loop, and we're all just walking around wondering what everyone else is thinking about us and hoping they accept us, and deciding what that acceptance then needs to look like. So,
I think my goal is probably to be with the world as it is.
yeah, absolutely. That's a much healthier goal, because
And
guess what? You don't get to control the rest of it anyway.
mhm. Just be with the world as it, see it as it is, and understand it for what it is, appreciate it for what it is, and then let go.
Let the experiences be what they are. That's
Mm.
just be in the experience, and take away from that what you can. You can still take away from these experiences and move towards what you want in your life, but ultimately recognizing you don't have a lot of control over many aspects of it. So how do you mitigate that? How do you continue showing up, not worrying about what everyone else is thinking about you?
Mm.
So thank you, Anson. I always appreciate the things that you bring to group. You always make us go a little bit deeper in some of our discussion.
Well,
We are
I have
we
another one that's
well,
for
I'm
next
gonna
time. So
Perfect. Then we'll save that one for Tuesday night, and we'll look forward to that. We have about 5 minutes left today, just by the clock, and I do want to leave an opportunity for anybody who's on that has questions specific to their microdose, as far as finding their dose, what they're looking for. Is it too high? Is it too low? What should I do? So I'm going to pause and just open up that conversation right now if anyone came with questions specific to that.
I have a question, Charity.
Yeah.
You know me, I started in, I think it was February or March. And so I'm kind of transitioning from a short-term user to a longer-term user. And I was at the low end of the spectrum, the point, is it 0.05 or 0.5? I can never remember.
0.05.
But
Yes.
as we transition into, a longer-term use pattern, what do you recommend or see? I mean, from your other clients or patients, are people continuing at the same level? Are they going down? Are they going up? Are they experimenting? Is it all of the above, or um, just just how do we think about that and titrate our, our doses or not?
That's a great question, Scott. And the first answer is it's all of the above because it is very individualized. Each person will ultimately determine what is most helpful to them. But when we look at just kind of what I'll call a typical reduction of microdosing over time, first might be reducing that dose, depending on a dose that somebody has found to be helpful to them. So over time, reducing that dose. But then the other step to that really is reducing number of days. Don't need to continue microdosing every day. If you found that you're at the place where you're getting the benefits that you need, maybe it goes to every other day. And then maybe it's every 3 days. And then maybe it's a few days in a row and then a week off. Just that can be kind of dependent on what is going on in life. So just to use myself as an easy reflection or reference point, for me, I don't microdose every single day now, but I know when my levels of either hormones are shifting or anxiety might look a little bit different, or, for example, on weekends when we have expos going on, I know there's a lot more that I'm going to need to be on point with, a lot more conversations, a lot more logistical things happening. I'm typically microdosing on expo days, certainly on setup day, because that's where making sure all the ducks are in a row and all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted for each location and team to have what they need. So I know that those are days that tend to have more expected of me. I expect myself to show up in a different way or in a more on point way. And so those are days that I'll microdose. Or if there's things that are just happening in life where I'm noticing that emotions tend to be a little bit heavier, those are days that I'll microdose also because I don't want to respond to my life and to the people in my life from an emotional place. That typically doesn't lead to the outcome that I want. So quieting that emotional response by allowing the psilocybin to help reduce some blood flow to the amygdala helps me be able to show up in a more consistent way. That's been part of my journey. But that's kind of what we see for individuals going forward is listen to your brain. Your brain will really give you feedback on is today a day that I want to microdose. So let's say you don't, and then at the end of the day, you're like, today might have been a good day to do that. Then maybe you microdose the next day. But it does shift from reducing the dose to then also not dosing every single day and just recognizing how it's a helpful tool for you because we're not going to change the ultimate outcome of the human experience. We're not, the goal is not to live in some place of utopia or self-actualization where we're like, my life is great. I'm forever changed. I'll never have a conflict. No one will ever irritate me. No one will ever cut me off in traffic. My partner will never say something that hurts my feelings. Yeah. My teenagers will never disrespect me. People out in society will always see me and validate me. Those things are not what the goal is. The goal is how are we showing up each day for ourselves in the way that we want to? And so understanding how that microdosing is helpful as a tool is where we start making those shifts. I know your face is like, you did not tell me the logistical engineering way of linear completion that I want for this microdosing process. And that's because it's not there. There
Yeah.
isn't just one way for everybody, but it is a reduction of dosage over time, and then it is a reduction of the number of days that it's used, but giving yourself permission to continue to have it as a tool for you.
And I know we're short on time, and I'll ask if there's a forum. Is there a forum in place for us to articulate these things, anonymously or not online?
As far as like a discussion and being able to have the
Discussion
discussion
group?
online
Yes.
continue.
Yes.
I don't have anything that, and we as a company don't have anything that exists, in that way right now. Obviously you're welcome to email in or text into the company at any time, and one of our team members will certainly respond to you. But in order to just have more discussion, we do have a Facebook page that's obviously not anonymous, but certainly some people interact through that. Otherwise, these groups, you're welcome to show up and have a black screen and put iPhone user if you want to ask some more questions.
No, it's just, sometimes when you can take the time to write things down, it's a little more clear and thought out and so forth. But I've always, I've been looking for that for a while, and I'm hoping that someday there'll be a place for us to go as your patient and not patients, but microdosing users and share those ideas and thoughts that don't come to us on certain Saturdays or whatever,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
and I would
during the course.
certainly recommend writing those things down when they do come to you. And then, that's why we have these groups. We do have a new group that's going to be starting up hopefully in November that I'm super excited about. We're in the finalized stages of getting it put together, but it'll be an art group, art therapy focus group. And so my little friend up there in the Northeast, yes, thought of you for sure to participate in that. But more information will be coming out about that hopefully within the next couple of weeks as far as when that will be launching. But the goal is, Scott, to your request, to continue to create an environment or a space for people to come and to have these conversations. And so writing those things down when they do come to you, writing them down for yourself and even going back and reading them, there's a lot that can be gained from that objective view of our own thoughts when we write something down and then go back and read it. But that would certainly be something that I would kind of recommend at this point. So then when the discussion time does come, maybe it's sorted out in another discussion way.
I still want that forum, so if there's anybody geeky out there that wants to set that up, I would be a ready participant.
I
I
am
mean,
open to geeky people reaching out to me. You guys know I've made it very clear what my skill set is, and I'm happy to have a. Hey, trust me, I'm not leading the art therapy group either, because even when the therapists
yeah,
that we're adding to our team discussed, I was like, "That's amazing." I mean, my brain would not come up with that because that's not how my brain thinks. But I love to be able to collaborate with other people who have other expertise and other things that they can bring that it adds to the experience for everybody, and that's the goal. So yes, geeks unite. I'll bring all my neuroscience geekiness, the rest of you bring some IT geekiness, and I am open to that.
thank you.
All right, what I am going to do now, I'm happy to stay on for a continued conversation. I am going to go ahead and pause our recording for the day. So for those of you that are listening online, thank you so much for taking the time to listen into group. Even after the fact, if you ever want to join in, you can go to our website, growyourownthoughts.org, and dates, times, and Zoom links are found on the calendar at the bottom of the home page. So we look forward to connecting next time.